Hello, fellow cyborgs, and welcome to my 2019 wrap-up and my favorite books of the year. So first, I want to talk to you about my bookish stats. This will include my star rating distributions, how much money I spent on the books, how many books I hauled this year, etc., etc. If you're not interested in this, I will put a time right here, to tell you to skip to for my favorite books of the year. So let's talk about purchasing books first. In 2019, I hauled 41 books. 26 I purchased myself and 15 were gifts. Overall, I hauled 15 less things than in 2018. I asked for less books this year for Christmas. Goodreads tells me I read 122 things in 2019, which is 4 more than in 2018. Of the books hauled, I read 31 that were hauled in 2019, 23 that were hauled in 2018, 1 from 2017, 3 from 2016, and 5 from before 2015. I DNF/unhauled only 9 books. That was 22 less things that I DNF or unhauled as compared to 2018. So from those numbers, I can glean that I have definitely stopped hauling as much as I was before, which I think is awesome. I hauled 41 books in 2019 and read 31 of them. So that's a pretty good haul to read ratio. Just like last year, I am reading books that I have purchased more recently than books that I've purchased later. And it looks like I have been seriously disliking less of the books that I have been reading this year, which is good. Of the books I purchased myself, I spent $294.50 on them, which was $13 more than in 2018. Per book, that comes out to $11.32, which is roughly the same as it was in 2018. Most of the book purchases of 2019 were from Powell's online bookstore or brand new from independent booksellers, so this number doesn't surprise me, nor does it concern me. Let's talk about the ratings I gave all of those books. Fortunately, I had 0 1-star reads. I did have 15 2-star reads. Most of those were DNFs or unhauls, but that was 14 less than in 2018. I had 55 3-star reads, which was exactly the same as in 2018. I had 41 4-star reads, which is a pretty great number, and that's 11 more than in 2018. And I had 11 5-star reads. 6 of those were rereads, but still, that was 9 more 5-star reads than I had in 2018. So I definitely think that there were still a lot of just okay books, which are in the 3-star range for me in 2019, but overall I like that my 2s and 1 stars have decreased in number and my 5 and 4 stars have increased in number. I would say that overall, even though 2019 didn't have a plethora of 5-star reads, it was still a pretty darn good year. I reread 22 books without even really planning on it, except for the Bronte Binge Project. That was 18 more than in 2018. I read 38 audiobooks, which definitely helped boost my numbers of my total books read and was overall a really enjoyable experience. And I plan to continue using audiobooks quite a lot. And then as far as books that I borrowed, there were 32 things that I either borrowed from the library, friends, or read free online. That's 25 more than in 2018. So overall, I'm really pleased with these trends. A lot of them are quite similar to 2018, and the small shifts are for the better in my opinion. More higher rated books, less hauls, more things that I'm getting from the library, and more audiobooks and rereads. So now let me talk to you about my favorite books of the year. So I have some books that have received 3 or 4-star reads that were really memorable reading experiences that I wanted to talk to you about first. Reading Linda Lear's biography of Beatrix Potter with Natalie from A Curious Reader and Emma Anders was definitely a highlight of 2019. This kicked off a Beatrix Potter binge and obsession that lasted about 2 months, and it was so fun to do a deep dive into Beatrix Potter and pair nonfiction with fiction readings. It was just a really lovely experience, and it kind of made me feel like I was in school again, but in the best way possible. I also quite enjoyed reading The Oresteia by Aeschylus. This was a recommendation from Libby Stevenson. It's a Greek play, an ancient Greek play, technically a trilogy of plays, but it got me reading other Greek plays, and that's something that I would definitely like to pursue more. I would like to reread The Oresteia at some point, maybe in a different translation, not that I didn't like the one that I read the first time, and also read some of the other plays that I tried reading with more modern translations, which I think would help my enjoyment. But this was definitely a fun little diversion at the beginning of 2019. I really enjoyed discovering The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. I had grown up with knowing this story as a child, but never had read the source material, and and this has become one of my new favorite autumnal reads, and I really look forward to rereading it this year. Speaking of rereads, I super enjoyed rereading Ancillary Justice with Sarai from Sarai Talks Books. This is my favorite sci-fi trilogy and one of my favorite books of all time. This world is complex and cozy, full of revenge, but also tea, and it was just a joy from cover to cover. I'm currently rereading the second book in the trilogy and will finish rereading the trilogy with Sarai in 2020 at some point, and it's just definitely reminds me why rereading can be the best experience. I also started rereading the How to Train Your Dragon series by Cressida Cowell. I have the audiobooks narrated by David Tennant, and they are just such gems. They really help lift my mood and relax as I'm trying to fall asleep, especially if it's a restless night, and I will look forward to continuing my re-listen to these books in 2020. There were also 3 Victorian classics that were wonderful surprises in 2019. I had started reading Bleak House with the Dickens along, hosted by Katie from Books and Things, but didn't get very far. This became a really intimidating book still on my physical TBR, but with the help of the audiobook narrated by Simon Vance, this was something that was just absolutely lovely. I'm hoping to reread this in physical form rather than audiobook in 2020 to savor the twists and turns and very interesting characters. I had thought that Thomas Hardy was a complete miss of a Victorian author for me until I picked up The Mayor of Casterbridge. The premise of this sounds absolutely depressing, and I know I thought this would redeem Thomas Hardy in my eyes, but I was wrong. This was a thoroughly enjoyable audiobook experience, and I am now looking forward to trying out more Thomas Hardy works. My spontaneous buddy read with Sarai of Dr. Wordle's School by Anthony Trollope was also such a pleasant surprise. I had been tackling 800-page standalone novels by Trollope and trying to get through the Chronicles of Barsetshire, and had pretty much just been liking everything else that I had read by Trollope, besides Christmas at Thompson Hall, which is my favorite short story by him. But Dr. Wordle's School, which is a standalone that is not 800 pages long, definitely gave me hope that I just hadn't really been reading the Trollope that's right for me. I'm looking forward to exploring more Trollope this year and hopes of finding some more standalones that I enjoy at more than a 3-star level. So now onto my favorite books of the year finally. These are the 5 stars of 2019 that weren't rereads, and I thought I'd just talk to you about all of them. The first one is one I didn't even mention on my channel when I read it earlier in the year because I borrowed it and frankly was too lazy to get the thumbnail out when I was editing a wrap-up, so I'm going to talk to you about it now for the first time. I read Pearl by Molly Idle. This is a children's picture book about a mermaid who doesn't know her purpose in life. The illustrations are beautiful, the mermaids are done in a completely different style than I've ever seen, but still equally ethereal and beautiful. I also really enjoyed the message in this story about finding your niche in the world and everybody having a purpose. This was such a surprise, and I'm really glad that my best friend kind of forced me to read it. It was certainly an enjoyable experience from cover to cover, and I probably should own my own copy at some point. I certainly got lucky with my buddy reads with Sarai because 2 of the books we read together are 5-star reads for the year. The first is Embers of War by Gareth L. Powell. This is a recommendation from Becky M, and it certainly didn't disappoint. This is a multi-perspective narrative where one of the main narratives is Trouble Dog, the AI of a ship who used to be for battle but now is retired. I certainly do love books about AIs. If Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice and Becky Chambers' The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet had a baby, it would be Embers of War. The world building is simple and elegant. The plot is pacey, but not too crazy, and the characters are well developed. I really loved this first book and need to reread it so I can get onto the sequel. Sarai and I also buddy read A Closed and Common Orbit. This is the sequel to A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This follows Lovelace, who was the AI of a ship, but now is trapped in a human-like body, and Pepper, who has taken her under her wing and has something to say about AIs and manufactured humans. This was such a cozy read that I had really low expectations of. A lot of booktubers I watched thought this paled in comparison to the first book in the series, and I was really expecting this to be a lackluster deal. But Lovelace and Pepper and learning more about the Eluans was just delightful, cozy, and wonderful. This was a 5-star read from beginning to end, and I definitely still love the first 2 books in the Wayfarer series. The final 2 books are probably the stars of my year of 2019. These are books that I think will stick with me and be 5 stars no matter when and where in in my life I read them. Shirley by Charlotte Bronte was one of the last books by the Bronte sisters that I had to read for the first time for my Bronte binge in 2019. Lately, I've been feeling that I've grown out of loving Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. When I first picked up Villette, I thought that maybe Villette would replace Jane Eyre as my favorite classic, but instead Shirley came to the rescue. Shirley takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, so in the early 1800s, and it follows a group of characters who all live in close proximity to one another. There is mystery and threats and, of course, romantic love. The writing style is beautiful. It has the charm of Charlotte Bronte's nature writing, which I found lacking in Villette. There's also a reference to a mermaid, which always brightens my day. I really look forward to rereading Shirley, hopefully in 2020, and see what I think upon rereading what I assume is my new favorite classic. Being Mortal by Atul Gawande was an absolute surprise. One of my friends gave it to me out of the blue. I had completely forgotten that I wanted to read this, and when I picked it up, I devoured it in a matter of days. This is one of my favorite nonfictions and another book that I feel every human should read. This book discusses end-of-life decisions, figuring out what quality of life means for each individual person, and looking critically at our senior living situations in America. It also goes into the history of hospitals and senior living facilities and talks about how we need to change our sense of medicine for the future. This was eye-opening and heartbreaking, and I think will be especially useful as my parents age and I will have to make these difficult decisions. This was the biggest surprise of the year, and I loved it the entire time I was reading it. Being Mortal is definitely one of my favorite books of all time, and if you haven't read it, I really think you should. So that was my 2019 wrap up and all of the books that I loved. Please let me know in the comments down below your favorite book of 2019 and the book you're most excited to get to in 2020. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a great start to your new year and continue to be lovely.